What if the woman you thought you loved was never really the one but simply the mirror you needed to survive? There's a moment many men remember not when love began, but when it ended. Not with a scream, not with betrayal, but with silence. The kind of silence that doesn't just echo in your room but in your chest. She stopped texting. She pulled away. Maybe she left. Maybe she didn't have to. You just felt it, that cold distance where warmth used to be. And in that instant, your world collapsed. But not because she was gone. No. Because the version of you that existed in her eyes no longer had a place to live. You see, most men think heartbreak is about losing someone else. But what if it's really about realizing you never built anything inside yourself strong enough to stand when she left? For years, maybe decades, you shaped yourself around approval, her attention, her affection, her validation. And when that structure broke, so did you. Not because of love, but because of dependency. This isn't a love story, it's a reckoning. And today, we go back. Back to the first time you confused being seen with being whole. Back to the moment you decided comfort was safer than truth. And most importantly, back to the place where your soul started outsourcing its worth, all in the name of love. Because if you don't return to that place and confront it, you'll keep falling. Not in love, but in avoidance. What most people call falling in love is not awakening, it's regression. It's not the arrival of truth, it's the collapse of your independence. The world romanticizes the feeling of losing yourself in someone else as if that surrender is holy. But the truth is darker, and for many men far more dangerous. Because what they call love is often just emotional dependence in disguise. Think about it. You meet someone. She's beautiful, attentive, and for the first time in a long time, you feel seen. Not just noticed, seen. And that gaze becomes addictive. It gives you something you didn't even realize you were starving for, a reflection. Not of who you are, but of who you hope to be. And so, without even noticing, you begin to shape yourself around that reflection. You talk the way she likes. You hide your shadows. You overextend to keep her attention. And every little sign of withdrawal, a delayed reply, a shorter hug, a subtle distance feels like emotional death. Why? Because you didn't fall in love with her. You fell in love with the version of yourself that only exists when she's around. That's not love. That's dependence. That's a spiritual hijacking. And what's worse, you volunteered for it. Hegel said identity is not static. It's formed through contradiction, a dynamic struggle between the self and the other, between what is known and what resists. But when you fall too hard too fast, you skip that struggle. You bypass the labor of becoming and instead use her presence to numb the ache of not knowing who you are. You build your selfhood on borrowed ground, on the fragile foundation of someone else's attention. And here's the brutal truth. Anything built that way will eventually fall. Because no one, no matter how loving, no matter how loyal, can carry the weight of your unformed identity. It's not her job to reflect your worth. It's yours. Men who fall into this trap often describe the relationship as intense, passionate, even soulmate level. But that intensity is often just code for desperation, the desperation to be completed. And in that desperation, you give up your center. You stop being. You start performing. So when she leaves, and she always does, eventually, even if just emotionally, it feels like death. Not because she was your other half, but because you never built a whole self to begin with. Your pain isn't proof of love. It's proof of absence, the absence of grounded selfhood. This is where your real work begins. Not in winning her back, not in replacing her, but in facing the uncomfortable truth. You didn't love her. You used her to avoid becoming. And until you confront that, every love you enter will become another form of escape. The good news, What you built in dependence can be broken and rebuilt, not around her, but around truth. What is the true foundation of identity? According to Hegel, it isn't built in isolation. It's born in a dynamic exchange, a dialectic between two conscious beings. He calls this the struggle for recognition, and it's not about praise, approval, or admiration. It's about something far more existential, the acknowledgement of your inner freedom by another free being. Recognition is the mirror in which your spirit confirms its shape, but that mirror must reflect your autonomy, not your dependency. Here's where most men fall into the trap. You meet a woman and she seems to see you. At first it feels mutual. Attention is reciprocated, feelings grow, intimacy builds. But slowly, often silently, something shifts. You begin to crave her gaze. You notice yourself adjusting, adapting, softening, performing. You want to be what she wants, not because it's who you are, but because you fear losing her validation. And with each quiet compromise, with every moment you trade truth for comfort, something inside you weakens. Something authentic begins to die. And here's the danger: if she doesn't recognize your inner freedom, your contradictions, your flaws, your sovereignty, and you still attach your identity to her perception of you, you don't become a man. You become a slave. Not in chains, but in spirit. You thought your devotion made you loyal. Hegel would say it made you dependent. You thought sacrificing for her was a sign of deep love. But if that sacrifice came at the cost of your selfhood, your ability to stand alone, to think independently, to be yourself without fear, then it wasn't love. It was submission. Recognition must come from strength, not need. It must be offered freely by someone who sees your wholeness and honors it. If you beg to be seen, you're already invisible. If you cling for approval, you've already surrendered your value. This is what Hegel warns us about. The man who chases recognition from someone who does not recognize him as free is engaged in a losing battle. His identity becomes reactive, not creative. Defensive, not sovereign. He doesn't evolve, he conforms. The most tragic part. You may think you found something deep, something real. But beneath the romantic glow is a psychological transaction. See me so I can exist. And the moment she withdraws, whether by choice, by conflict, or simply by boredom, your entire selfhood collapses. Not because you lost her, but because you never claimed yourself. And that's the lesson. If recognition doesn't begin from within, any external recognition will enslave you. You want to be seen. Stand up. Speak truth. Be someone worth recognizing. And then, only then, if someone sees you clearly and meets you in mutual freedom, you will not collapse when they leave. Because they didn't complete you. They simply saw you. And this time, you were finally there to be seen. You thought your loyalty was noble. You believed that giving her everything, your time, your energy, your heart, proved how deeply you loved. You measured your devotion by how much you were willing to sacrifice. But Hegel would tell you, sacrifice without self-awareness is not strength. It is a symptom of weakness, a surrender of the very process by which a man becomes himself. The world loves to romanticize devotion. We're taught to admire the man who would do anything for love, the man who waits, the man who stays, the man who breaks but keeps giving. But when you strip away the poetic framing, what's left? Often it's not devotion at all, it's a desperate plea to be seen. A quiet hope that if you give enough, she'll validate your existence. That if you lose yourself for her, she'll finally make you whole. But love cannot substitute for the self you never built. You handed over your becoming. You asked someone else to finish what only you were born to do. That's not romance, it's avoidance. That's not strength, it's collapse. Because real devotion, the kind that means something, can only come from a man who has already done the work of knowing who he is. Without that foundation, all your loyalty is rooted in insecurity. You don't give because you're whole. You give because you're afraid that without her there's nothing left. And maybe you haven't said it out loud, but it's there in the way you chase, in the way you apologize for things you didn't do, in the way you shrink yourself to keep her close. You aren't offering love. You're offering your identity in exchange for attention. Hegel's philosophy makes this clear: selfhood is born through negation, through conflict, separation, reflection. It is forged in solitude, not submission. If your love requires you to dissolve who you are, it's not love. It's regression. You're not expanding, you're disappearing. This is why so many men feel lost when a relationship ends. Not because they miss her, but because she was holding together the illusion of a self that never fully existed. You didn't just lose love, you lost the scaffolding that propped you up. And when it fell, so did everything you thought you were. But here's the hard truth: if you need someone else to feel real, you were never real to begin with. That's why devotion must come after self-knowledge, not before, not instead. A man who knows who he is doesn't beg. He doesn't prove his worth through sacrifice. He doesn't love to be validated, he loves because he is already full. And that kind of love doesn't destroy you when it ends. It refines you, it deepens you, it leaves you intact. So ask yourself this: have you been devoted or have you been disappearing? Because only one of those paths leads to love. The other leads to erasure. There's a brutal moment of realization that some men never recover from. It's not the moment she leaves. It's the moment you realize you were never standing on your own to begin with. You weren't just in love, you were dependent. Not just emotionally, but existentially. Your entire sense of self had been tied to her gaze, her approval, her presence. And when she withdrew, everything you thought you were came crashing down. Not because she broke you, but because you had built nothing solid without her. Hegel described this dynamic long before modern psychology gave it a name. He called it the master-slave dialectic. And while it may sound outdated, the truth behind it is timeless. In every relationship, there is a subtle, often invisible power exchange. And when one person becomes the center of validation for the other, a hierarchy is born. One becomes the confirmer. The other becomes the one desperate to be confirmed. You didn't mean for it to happen. No one does. It starts with admiration, affection, intimacy. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, your spirit bends. You compromise truth to keep harmony. You sacrifice your voice to preserve connection. You stop saying what you mean and start saying what won't scare her away. And that's how it begins the transformation from man to servant. Not a servant of duty, but of self-erasure. The irony. You probably thought your sacrifice made you noble, that your loyalty proved depth. But Hegel would argue otherwise. He would say that if your identity relies on someone else's perception of you, you are not free. You are not real. You are subordinate not by her force, but by your own internal poverty. And the danger runs deeper than you think. Because once you become the slave in spirit, everything becomes a negotiation. You start performing, pleasing, adapting, not because it's honest, but because you can't afford the risk of disapproval. You stop existing for truth and start existing for survival. And the worst part, you call it love. But love cannot exist where freedom has been traded for comfort. Real love is the union of two sovereign beings, not a merger of needs, not a contract of desperation. The moment you place your selfhood in the hands of another, you hand them the power to destroy you. And that's not romance, that's psychological servitude. So ask yourself, when she left, did you lose a partner, or did you lose yourself? If her absence shattered you, it's not because she was your world, it's because you had no world of your own. The master-slave dynamic isn't just a philosophical metaphor, it's the silent blueprint beneath every relationship where one person is afraid to be alone. You want freedom. Then stop seeking permission to exist. Build something inside yourself that no one else can take away. only then will love become real. Because only then will you finally be free. You didn't love her. Not really. What you loved was the way she made you forget you were incomplete. You loved the silence she filled, the ache she numbed, the reflection she gave you a man who finally felt like enough. But here's the brutal truth that wasn't love. It was anesthesia. She didn't complete you. You used her to avoid confronting the emptiness inside yourself. This is the illusion most men fall into, not because they're weak, but because they were never taught the difference between being seen and being whole. So when a woman enters their life with beauty, softness, affection, it feels like salvation. But salvation isn't love, it's escape. And anything built on escape will eventually collapse. You didn't choose her freely. You chose her desperately. You clung to the way she made you feel, not because she revealed who you were, but because she helped you forget who you weren't. And so she became more than a partner. She became your mirror, your therapist, your mother, your God. That's not devotion. That's dependence dressed in romantic clothing. You gave her a burden she never asked to carry. You handed her your unprocessed trauma, your lack of self-worth, your fragile identity, and silently hoped she'd fix it all just by loving you. That wasn't fair to her, and it wasn't honest for you. Because deep down, you weren't offering love, you were offering a bargain. Make me feel whole and I'll give you everything. But no one can make you whole, and anyone you expect to will eventually disappoint you. Because they're not meeting you as a man, they're propping you up as a projection. And when they stop, when they pull away, when they disappoint you, when they fail to reflect back the image you so desperately needed to survive, you collapse. Not because they betrayed you, but because you never stood on your own. Hegel warned us the self that demands completion from another will always suffer. Why? Because it hasn't yet passed through the fire of contradiction. It hasn't been forged in solitude and pain and self-reflection. It's still seeking something outside to resolve what's broken inside. But what's broken can't be fixed through affection. It must be rebuilt through truth. If you want to love, truly love, you must meet her not to be completed, but to be witnessed. You must come as someone who has suffered through the ache and survived it, as someone who no longer needs to be seen in order to feel real. So ask yourself, when you said you loved her, was it her you loved or the way she made you forget your ache? Because one is love, the other is illusion. And the difference between the two is everything. There's a kind of ache that most men spend their entire lives trying to silence. They chase women's status approval, anything loud enough to drown it out. But the truth, that ache is sacred. It's not a curse. It's a signal. A call to begin the most important work a man will ever do, the labor of becoming. Hegel called it the negation of negation. The painful process where the self confronts contradiction, sheds illusion, and begins to shape something real out of what was false. Not through peace, not through comfort, but through suffering. Suffering that's not random but necessary. Because until you've suffered consciously, without escape, without anesthesia, you haven't actually lived as yourself. You've only lived through projections and roles. Most men will do anything to avoid that confrontation. They'll fall in love, quickly lose themselves completely and call it depth. But what they're really doing is outsourcing the work, hoping that affection will replace reflection, that romance will replace responsibility, that warmth will replace willpower, and then they wonder why they collapse when it ends. Becoming isn't soft, it's violent. It strips you, it humiliates you. It breaks down the version of you that was built to be tolerated and demands that you start again with nothing but truth. That's why solitude is not punishment, it's purification. A man alone is a man face to face with his soul, no performance, no reflection, no permission, just the raw materials of who he is laid bare. And that's where the labor begins. You sit in the silence and feel everything you've been avoiding. The insecurity, the fear, the longing to be chosen, and you don't run from it. You don't text your ex. You don't swipe for a distraction. You stay. Because staying is the fire. Staying is what transforms. The world will tell you that becoming a man means achievement, that it means status control dominance. But Hegel would argue the opposite. Real manhood begins the moment you let go of control and face contradiction head-on. When you realize you can't build yourself through affirmation alone, you must walk through the death of the false self. And what dies is everything you thought would save you. Her touch, her eyes, her approval. You let them go. You stop making her your reason and you start building one of your own. That's what it means to become. Not to arrive, but to struggle. To suffer well. To shape clarity out of confusion. And to know that the fire inside you wasn't asking to be put out, it was asking to be used. So if you're hurting, don't run. Don't numb it. Don't call it failure. Call it beginning. You thought you were giving. You thought your love was selfless, patient, sacrificial, noble. You believed that your willingness to stay, to suffer, to carry the emotional weight, proved your depth. But what if that wasn't love at all? What if it was theft, not of money or time or energy, but of spirit? Most men never question the intention behind their devotion. They assume that because it hurts, it must be real. That because it costs them something, it must be meaningful. But Hegel would challenge that. He would ask, where did that love come from? From truth or from need? Because if it came from need, it wasn't love. It was possession, a disguised demand, a silent negotiation that sounded like, if I give you everything, you will reflect me back. You will make me whole. That isn't romantic. It's manipulative. You didn't want to connect, you wanted confirmation. You didn't want to offer love, you wanted to extract identity. You didn't want her to be free, you wanted her to reassure you. And that, Hegel would say, is not a relationship between two conscious beings. It's a performance between a projector and a mirror. The cruel irony is this: the more you thought you were giving, the more you were actually taking. Taking her presence as a substitute for purpose. Taking her attention as a substitute for meaning. Taking her love as a substitute for your own self-respect. That's not love. That's spiritual theft. And it gets worse, because when she pulled away, you called her selfish. You said she changed. You said she gave up. But what you really meant was, she stopped reflecting back the man I was trying to be. And suddenly, you didn't know who you were anymore. But that's not her fault. That's the cost of never building an identity independent of approval, of never learning how to carry the weight of your own emotional existence. And if you're honest, maybe you never really saw her not as a person. You only saw what she gave you: the gaze, the warmth, the mirror. So when she left, she didn't just take herself. She took the illusion you were hiding inside, and now you're grieving not a relationship, but a version of yourself that only existed in her eyes. Here's the truth: when love is rooted in emotional neediness, it always takes more than it gives. It feeds off another's light to keep your own shadow hidden. That's not devotion, that's dependency. If you want real love, you have to start with real selfhood, not performance, not desperation, not the echo of someone else's gaze. You have to stop stealing reflections and start standing in your own. Only then will your love stop being a transaction and start becoming truth. Collapse feels like death. It feels like the floor giving out from under you, the silence after the goodbye, the space in your chest where her voice used to echo. You tell yourself it's heartbreak, that you're mourning a love lost, a future erased. But if you're honest, brutally honest, you're not grieving her. You're grieving the version of yourself that only existed through her eyes. And that version, it was never real. It was constructed, maintained, and ultimately destroyed by a dependency you refuse to face. But here's the paradox: that destruction. It's the beginning of everything. Hegel calls this the moment of negation, the shattering of illusion. It's not meant to feel good. It's meant to feel like annihilation, because something inside you does die. The false self, the borrowed identity, the emotional scaffolding you built with her attention as the foundation. When that collapses, you're not just left alone. You're left exposed. No more reflection. No more performance. Just silence. Just you. Most men panic in this space. They run. They find someone new. They distract themselves, numb themselves, rebuild fast, and call it healing. But if you do that, you miss the entire point. Because collapse isn't punishment. It's invitation. It's the door you've been avoiding, the one that leads to your actual self. The silence is sacred. That cold, unbearable quiet is where your real voice starts to speak, not the voice that pleases, not the voice that performs, but the voice that's been buried beneath years of dependency and noise. And that voice is weak at first, unsure, awkward, but it's yours. If you can sit with that silence, if you can resist the urge to escape it, something happens. Slowly, painfully. You begin to form a new identity, not one based on who she wanted, not one built to be desired, but one rooted in truth. A self not designed for approval, but for alignment. You'll remember things you used to love. You'll question beliefs you absorbed without thought. You'll feel emotions you've spent years suppressing. And through that process, through reflection, writing solitude, sometimes rage, you'll start to realize you didn't lose yourself when she left. You were never fully there to begin with. But now, you're being born. This is the awakening Hegel speaks of, spirit becoming actual not through peace but through contradiction, not through connection but through collapse. The death of illusion is the birth of truth. And truth hurts, but truth also frees. So if you're there now in the rubble, in the void, don't rush to rebuild. Let the silence speak. Let the ache carve out space inside you. Because that space, that's the beginning of freedom. And if you can endure it, not fix it, not numb it, but truly endure it, then for the first time, you won't need to fall in love to feel alive. You'll already be. You can't love from emptiness. You can only crave cling project. And yet that's how most men enter relationships, from a place of absence, from a place of longing, of lack of quiet desperation to feel whole. Not because they're broken, but because they've never been taught to build a self before seeking connection. They fall not in love, but into a dependency disguised as devotion. Real love doesn't begin with a need. It begins with a foundation, a man who has already done the inner labor. A man who has stood in solitude, confronted his fears, owned his shame, and carved meaning from the raw material of his own existence. A man who doesn't require love to feel alive but offers it because he already is. But when you approach love from lack, it becomes something else entirely. It becomes a transaction, a silent agreement. Reflect me, complete me, make me feel worthy, and I'll stay. You think you're loving her, but you're really trying to extract a self from her presence. And the moment she falters, the moment she stops confirming your worth, your illusion shatters. You feel rejected, abandoned, erased. But it wasn't love that got destroyed. It was your scaffolding. Hegel warned us about this. Love, when built from dependency, cannot withstand contradiction, because contradiction is inevitable. People change, they pull away, they assert boundaries. And if you don't have a strong internal structure, one forged through self-examination, not romantic fantasy, you will collapse every time. The man who builds his identity around being wanted will always live in fear. He will adjust himself endlessly, hide his truth, suppress his needs, all to avoid the existential terror of not being chosen. And that fear will poison everything. His vulnerability won't be a gift, it will be a weapon. His affection won't be free, it will be conditional. His love won't be presence, it will be a plea. But there is another way. It begins with reclaiming your center, with realizing that you don't need someone to reflect you in order to exist. That you're not defined by who stays or who leaves, but by how deeply you know yourself when no one's watching. That love should not be the place where you disappear, it should be the space where you're fully met. When you love from wholeness, everything changes. You don't chase. You don't cling. You don't confuse chemistry with destiny. You meet her not as a savior, but as an equal, not to fill you, but to walk beside you. And if she leaves, you grieve, but you remain intact, because your identity was never in her hands. It was always in yours. Real love is not about finding your missing piece. It's about becoming complete on your own and then offering that completeness to another. Only then can love stop being a mirror and start becoming a meeting. So, what now you've seen the illusion for what it is, the lie that love will complete you, that devotion will save you, that being desired is the same as being whole. The illusion has shattered. The woman is gone. The mirror is broken. And you are left with the only thing that ever truly mattered, yourself. Now begins the real work. And no, it won't come through comfort. It won't come through affirmations, podcasts, or surface-level distractions. It comes through silence, through solitude, through the kind of reflection most men are terrified to do because it means staring directly into the parts of yourself you've spent years avoiding. This is where Hegel becomes a guide, not just a philosopher. He tells us that spirit becomes actual only through contradiction, that selfhood isn't given, it's produced, that truth emerges not in harmony, but in rupture. And so the path forward is not found, it is forged, through fire, through friction, through three disciplines that you must now take up like sacred tools: reflection, discipline, and creation. Reflection means looking backward without excuse and looking inward without flinching. Ask the questions you've never dared to voice. Who am I without her gaze? Why did I give so much? What was I trying to avoid? Journal until your hand cramps. Sit in silence until the noise of your mind begins to unravel. Let every story you've told yourself fall apart until only truth remains. Discipline is the structure that holds you while you rebuild. Not the cold, rigid kind rooted in shame, but the quiet, steady kind that says, I'm no longer outsourcing my becoming. Wake early. Move your body. Read real books. Say no when you mean no. Let your daily habits remind you that you no longer live in pursuit of being wanted, but in service of becoming someone worth meeting. And then creation. Not just art or work, but the creation of a life built around truth. This is where you take the fragments and build again. Your own beliefs, your own values, your own rhythm. You stop chasing highs. You start building foundations. You stop proving your worth. You start living it. Because when you've passed through the fire, when you've endured the silence, when you've stopped mistaking love for rescue, you don't fall in love anymore. You meet it as an equal, as a man, as someone who no longer needs to be seen in order to exist. That's the path forward. It's not easy. It's not quick, but it's the only path that leads to freedom. And the only love that won't destroy you is the love that finds you already standing. The most dangerous illusion a man can carry is the belief that love will rescue him. That if he gives enough sacrifices, enough, becomes soft enough, someone will finally see him, and in that gaze, he'll finally feel real. But that's not love. That's escape. And the moment the person leaves or simply stops reflecting the image he clings to, everything collapses. Because the foundation was never truth. It was need. Here's what life will demand of you if you want to grow. Build first, connect second. You cannot love well if you don't know who you are without being loved. You cannot offer truth if your identity still depends on being chosen. The lesson is clear. Stop waiting to be seen and start becoming someone worth witnessing. That begins with solitude, with honest self-reflection, and with taking back the project of your becoming. This doesn't mean rejecting love. It means rejecting the lie that someone else's affection will solve what only self-awareness, discipline, and time can build. You were never meant to be completed. You were meant to evolve. So if you're hurting now, use it. Let the ache guide you, not into another pair of arms, but deeper into yourself. Because the man who can stand alone unshaken is the only one truly ready to stand beside someone else. And that kind of love, it doesn't weaken a man. It reveals him.